The Loreley's Grasp from 1973, also known as When the Screaming Stops, was my VHS watch of this week. I grabbed it off of Dark Side Records website just for the cover art alone, and I enjoyed the movie quite a bit. It's about a monster called the Loreley, who is a shape-shifting hot chick. There is some fun to be had with this movie as far as there's some unexpected gore, there's a little bit of nudity, and it actually starts out with some, so it hooks you right in the beginning of the film. But in general, this isn't a super exciting movie. But as I say every week, whatever I watch on VHS tends to get a little bit of a bump because of how enjoyable I find just watching an old movie on the VCR on Sunday morning. So while I wouldn't go out of my way to recommend this, one Letterboxd review described it as a rejected Star Trek episode, which I don't know if that's a joke or if that's actually true, but it does seem like an apt description of this movie. There's definitely some goofy fun to be had with this one, and it is staying in my collection. Doppelganger from 1993 is a psychological thriller slash kind of a little bit of a horror movie starring Drew Barrymore. In this movie, she plays a woman who has moved from New York to Los Angeles after her mother is murdered, and she becomes roommates with this guy who's a writer. And throughout the first 2/3 of the movie, there's a doppelganger, also played by Drew Barrymore, of course, stalking the both of them in a sense. I saw this movie described on Letterboxd by a few people as a poor man's Mulholland Drive, and I would really not go that far with this movie, but I'm glad I checked it out. This was a buddy watch with my friend Corey, and I watched it with my wife. All three of us enjoyed it to a certain extent. One thing that may be a little bit of a spoiler, but I can't resist talking about, is how the movie goes completely off the rails at the end with some very unexpected but awesome special effects work that had my jaw on the floor by the end of the movie. And it left me with the feeling of what the hell just happened in a good way. I think if you're a fan of Drew Barrymore, this is definitely a really nice oddity in her filmography. I would recommend it in that case. And also, again, for the amazing practical special effects in the last 10 to 15 minutes of the film, I think it's worth watching the whole movie just for that. Lady with a Sword is a 1971 Shaw Brothers movie that tells you exactly what the movie is about in the title, and I love when that happens. The movie starts with a woman and her son coming home from the funeral of the father and husband of the family, and they are attacked and the mother is murdered. The son escapes to his aunt. The aunt is the woman with the sword, and she wants to avenge her sister. Things become complicated when the lady with the sword discovers that her sister's attacker is a man who she was arranged to be married to when she was a child. So it becomes a little bit of a family drama. And I must say, when I was talking about the movie Lady Reporter last week, I complained that the parts that weren't fights were kind of sluggish, and I was just waiting for the next fight to start. With this movie, that is not the case. I actually really liked the character drama and everything that was going on in between the fights. And having said that, the fights were amazing. As you could guess, there's a lot of sword play and acrobatics and wire work. There is some gore, there's some blood splatter, not a ton, but there's enough there to satisfy you if that's what you're into. I grabbed this one on the 88 Films Blu-ray, and it is definitely staying in my collection. A Nightmare on Elm Street from 1984 is a fantastical horror movie written and directed by the great Wes Craven and starring the great Heather Langenkamp, Johnny Depp, and others. It is one of my favorite movies of all time, and my wife and I had the absolute pleasure of seeing it in a movie theater last week. I was so inspired by this rewatch that I actually went ahead and watched it again the next morning, but then also watched the entire series except for Freddy vs. Jason, which I may save if I watch the Friday the 13th series this month. But as far as the original, if you weren't there, it's really hard to convey how special this movie was at the time. And even looking back in the context of the movies that were out at the time, you can see how Freddy Krueger as a villain is very different from everything else that was out there, at least among the more popular horror films of the time. And if you're not aware, the movie is about a group of high school kids who are haunted by a dream demon, basically. And the first movie is kind of a mystery of who he is. And you eventually find out that he's Fred Krueger. And in the original movie, only Freddy himself and the nursery rhyme refers to Fred Krueger as Freddy. So I found that very interesting. The concept of a killer who can get you in your dreams is, of course, very scary, especially when you're a little kid, which is the first time that I saw all of these movies. So I will admit that there's a massive amount of nostalgia going into these rewatches. Also, I will say that Heather Langenkamp was my second biggest celebrity crush when I was a kid, second only behind Winona Ryder, and her performances especially hold up in the films that she was in. And when approaching this rewatch, I considered myself a 1 and 3 guy, which are the movies that she is in, and also New Nightmare, which is great. But I was really surprised how much I liked 2, 4, and 5 on a rewatch after many years. I can't remember the last time I saw 2, 4, and 5. I would always go to 1 and 3 if I felt like watching a Nightmare on Elm Street movie. And I will say that this series holds up in ways that astonished me. Especially 4 and 5. I was in a state of bliss watching 4 and 5 after so many years and just having it dawn on me how actually good they are. The practical effects in all of these movies is out of this world. And even with the series' low points that everybody talks about, for example, the pool party in Part 2 or the invisible boxing match in Part 4, those are minor blips in what is a amazingly good saga of horror movies. I agree with most people that Freddy's Dead is probably the weakest link, but even that was very fun to watch. I just felt that they tried to retcon too much and shoehorn too many things in what was supposed to be the last movie. I'm currently watching Never Sleep Again, which is that long documentary about the whole series, and it is really, really good. I think I've seen it before, but I'm really enjoying rewatching it. And it's amazing to think that this horror series launched the careers of Johnny Depp, Patricia Arquette, and many others. And rewatching them all in a row in 2025, they're timeless. They're excellent horror movies that hold up to this day. Even the ones that people don't like Part 2 and Freddy's Dead. Part 2 famously is the gay one, but we didn't know that when we were kids. I wonder if my parents knew that at the time. And while it's barely subtextual watching it in 2025, I can still take away something of a personal demon, personal darkness kind of story out of that. And it has some really beautiful and moving moments, especially towards the end. So yeah, Nightmare on Elm Street, the original one, has always been one of my favorite films. But I think for the time being, I can say that this series is my favorite horror series. And if you're into horror movies and you somehow have never seen the original Nightmare on Elm Street, either the first movie or the sequels, of course I would highly recommend them. I feel like I could talk about these movies all day, but I'll wrap it up with one final piece of advice. Whatever you do, don't fall asleep. And that'll do it for this video. Thank you for watching to the end. If you like these short movie reviews, I have a whole playlist on my channel. Thanks again, and I'll see you on the next video.